Hello, everyone. My name is Harini Calamur, and I work for Impact Science. And I essentially look at how can research be communicated, how can it be discoverable, and how does it get acted on. Um, Let me start by sharing my screen so that we can get this presentation started. So if I look at open access in India, before I look at open access in India, I think that the first thing that we need to look at is the promise of open access. So scientific research, like much else in the world, has been divided into two: those who have access and those who don't. Okay, there's a small privileged minority who has access, and a large majority, authors, researchers, institutions that don't have access, that don't get discovered, that don't get cited, that don't get talked about. And academic publishing, like much else in the world, has reflected these two worlds until the coming in of OA, and which is why OA has been so very fascinating for a lot of people. So India was one of the early adopters of open access. When archives started way back in the 90s, Indian scientists began depositing their preprints on archive servers. It was their way of gaining access to a world that was otherwise walled away from them. Okay, and the idea of their research being discovered, especially by KOLs, key opinion leaders in universities and research institutes in the UK and the US, was of tremendous interest because there was no other way of getting discovered. A, you don't get published in the right journals. Number two, you don't get discovered by those people, by the people who make a difference. Therefore, how do you have career progression? And that's what made archives so very, very interesting to Indian scientists. Even today, Indian researchers, Indian authors see depositing their preprints on preprint servers across the world as a way of getting discovered and as the way of making their own research open and accessible. If I look at India's policy on OA, the two major funders in India, DBT and DST, both declared that any publicly funded research needs to be made available to the general public as soon as possible. As soon as possible is a very interesting term. It can be anything from one day or the next day, right up to 3 years, depending on the publisher's own policies. The other thing that the OA policy of 2015 did was to recommend the setting up of IR, or institutional repositories. And all these institutional repositories would be connected to Science Central, which was a centralized repository that would harvest the full text and metadata of all this research. So the idea was not just the fact that that research was open, accessible. It was also the fact that you found the cross linkages between the research, and you could act on it if you so chose. If I look at DOAR's numbers, about 106 institutional repositories are there, including the major ones being CSIR and the Agricultural Council, the Council for Agricultural Research in India. Um, Now, given that the government policy backs away, given that researchers are prone or predisposed to depositing their preprints on preprint servers across the world, given the fact that there are IRs all over the place, is OA publishing in India a hit? And the answer is not really. It's not really a hit. About 23% of all published papers published in India are OA, which means the rest are not. Most papers are not deposited in IRs. Okay, they're not deposited. Awareness of OA, especially in the newer institutes, is extremely low. And a fair few researchers have, not just researchers, even people who head institutes have issues on the quality of research, the quality of peer review. And India and Indian research has been burnt by predatory journals. And as such, OA per se has a reputation problem in India. Now, how can publishers better serve the needs of diverse authors in India? And this is a big question. Number one is by talking about reputation. And I think that the first thing that they need to understand is that authors don't publish in OA journals. They publish in journals that are OA. And this might sound like semantics, but it's a very, very important distinction. And which means that they are looking at the same things that they would look at any other journal. So why is this journal credible is an important question that publishers need to answer. Why should I spend, my research is after 5 years of hard labor, okay, literally hard labor. And I've come up with a paper, and why is your journal good enough to carry my paper? And I think you will have to, in a world where there are 22,000 plus journals or 30,000 plus journals, why is this OA journal better than some other OA journal? And I think that publishers need to be able to communicate that well. I think the way to do that is to talk about the reputation of the editorial board. I think that's a great way of telling people how good your journal is. I think the second way is by talking about your peer review process. How long does it take? How transparent is it? So on and so forth. The third thing, which is very important, is how diverse is your peer review panel? Will they even understand the research that I'm talking about, the context in which I'm discussing the research? Would that happen? And this is especially, it may not be true of areas like theoretical physics or pure mathematics, but it's definitely true in areas like, let's say, health, okay, like social sciences, like any other area in the space where geography, race, ethnicity all end up mattering. And finally, what you need to be able to see here is how can you overhaul the reputation of open access itself to undo the damage caused by predatory journals. I think very, very important over here. The second thing is, again, super important, which is relook at APC. When I speak with publishers, especially OA publishers from the West, they all have waivers, but very often they're very quiet about their waivers because in the short term, they are not going to make revenue if waivers come into play. And they need to trade off short-term revenues with long-term gains as far as open access is concerned, which means that they need to start talking about waivers and uh, other allowances upfront, especially for authors from the global south. Um, in India, for example, many institutions do not pay for publishing. They believe that papers should not be paying, they should not be paying for their scientific output to be published in a journal, which means that if a researcher author wants to publish in an OA journal, then they have to do it out of their own, they have to pay for it themselves. And even if you look at a modest APC, let's say $500, you're talking about that being the salary, a monthly salary of an early career researcher. And very often this salary is delayed by many months. So you are in a bind here as far as publishing OA is concerned. Um, and therefore, the last thing that you need to look at is how do you inform authors about grants and disbursements that will allow them to publish OA without it being a financial burden on them and their families. And finally, discoverability. How do I get discovered? And this is a major question for Indian authors. And uh, they want to be discovered. It's not just important for them to publish. They want others to read their research. They want the right people in the West to read and cite their papers. And therefore, you need to tell them, you need to tell the author, what are you, the journal, doing to be able to get the journal itself, if not the paper, to be discoverable? Is the publication digital ready? Or are you print pretending to be digital? How are you enabling the discovery of content? Are you using SEO or the best practices of digital publishing that everybody else does to get discovered? Are you using newsletters? For example, if you're a journal that looks at physics, are you sending a newsletter out to the top 1,000 physics authors across the world, saying, here are the 5 great pieces of research that my journal has published in the last 6 months? And can I get discovered through that? Um, and finally, this is a digital universe, and we all know in a digital universe, things with any content with image gets discovered even faster. So, are you allowing for graphical abstract or other visual material that may help the content get discovered faster? And these are questions that publishers need to answer to themselves first, and then to the author. So, the three major points: number one is the reputation of the journal. Number two is the APC, and number three is discoverability. Thank you.